See, if that were me, I would have known I needed to run away and escape as soon as I got off the tour bus and saw that everyone at the compound was wearing the exact same color. I know when I'm in danger and I need to leave.
Congratulations, and welcome to this once-in-a-lifetime gathering.
Hi, I'm Lady Genevieve, and on my channel I talk about entertainment media. I had the opportunity to attend an early press screening of the new A24 film called Opus, starring Ayo Edebiri and John Malkovich. I'm going to share my minimal spoiler section first, and then we will get into the spoiler section, and you can choose how far you would like to proceed into knowing what's exactly in this film. Before we introduce the film's premise, I will say that I scored this at a 3.4 out of 5. The pull quote I sent for feedback to the publicity team that was handling the screening was as follows. Ayo Edebiri and John Malkovich's nail-biting game of cat and mouse will keep you guessing from start to finish. A darkly funny indictment of celebrity worship. Now, if I were to sum up the main reason for the film's deduction in scoring, it would be that I found that the ending didn't really land. I have a sense of what I believe the film might be trying to address, though that will have to be discussed in more detail in the spoilers section. It ends in such a way that feels rather muddled and convoluted in what it's trying to say with its final revelations about what's taken place before that point. Nonetheless, though, I found the film funny. It did make me laugh. The mystery was fun to follow through a lot of what happens in the main portion of the film at the story's primary location. And really, the main selling point, the strength of this film that it should lead with in trying to incentivize people to watch, is Ayo Edebiri and John Malkovich. It's not that the other performers don't also do good work, but those two are simply given the most to do, and they do it very well. So, if you like one or both of them, for that reason alone, I think it's probably worth watching just to see them work. But now the premise. Ayo Edebiri plays a journalist who is constantly being overlooked at her job. She has skills, ideas, energy, but other people are constantly given priority for various assignments. John Malkovich plays an eccentric, extremely famous and successful rock star named Alfred Moretti. Moretti announces to the world that after a long hiatus, during which he's mostly stayed hidden away, he's going to be releasing new music once again. He then proceeds to send out gift baskets to a select group of people, and these gift baskets are an exclusive invitation to what amounts to a glorified listening party. You're going to get flown out and driven to the compound Moretti lives at and listen to this new music, but little do you know, it's not going to be all fun and games. Ayo Edebiri, having the journalist instincts that she does, it doesn't take long for her to get the sense that something's not quite right with Moretti, this compound, all of the followers of his that live there, and so it's up to her to try to figure out exactly what's going on. Now, one of the main comedic selling points by far is seeing John Malkovich playing an eccentric, cultish character. Is John Malkovich having fun with the role, or is he just like that? Who can say? Watching the chaos of his strange behavior is why I had so much fun watching this. And Ayo Edebiri, she's just so easy to like and get invested in. She makes for a really compelling protagonist in this because you have the context of her struggling at work and feeling desperate to have a creative professional breakthrough as a journalist, so it grounds her character. You don't feel like she's some sort of hollow, overly perfect protagonist that you just expect to win in the end because why wouldn't she? For as over-the-top and outlandish Moretti is, along with the people at the compound and the other folks besides Ayo that were invited to this special listening party, she is ultimately what keeps the story grounded. Visually, there was a lot that I really liked about the film, particularly the way they show Moretti as being a strange and unusual person, as well as a larger-than-life rock star and all the charisma that comes with that. That's not where I had the issue with this film. Now, I cannot go into too many specifics until we get to the spoiler section, but for now, I will say that the film presents the celebrity worship Moretti receives as a famous rock star, and the more or less unquestioning loyalty and devotion of his followers, like cult followers following a cult leader. Either way that you look at it, there's that notion of a cult of personality, meaning intense devotion to a particular person, in this case, Moretti. It took me a bit to ponder the film and what I believe it might be trying to say, and I ultimately landed on the point of feedback that it was a bit clumsy in its attempt to address certain themes or topics. I think that part of why the film is getting as many bad reviews as it is because people are not finding that subtext to be clear enough. They don't want to sit with the material and reflect on it to try to decode whatever it's trying to say. However, when I looked up Mark Anthony Green, who is the film's director and screenwriter, in looking at his IMDb page, I found that this is his feature film debut. Before this, he also has a credited short film, but apart from that, this is basically basically it. Now, if you're one of my regular viewers, you should already know this, but to anyone else that might be watching this review and my channel for the first time, I have made the sentiment clear in 2025, both on YouTube and on my Patreon, that when it comes to directors that are making their feature film debut, I tend to lean towards being less harsh towards them when I have that context in mind. I'm more likely to look at what they've made and think about the parts that they did well, what strengths did they demonstrate as a storyteller, and envision their potential of what they might be capable of moving forward in their careers. A lot of people gave Love Hurts a bad review. I was slightly nicer with my feedback, and that was a feature film debut for its director. And I felt similar about The Damned. That was a feature film debut for its director as well. I think that the humor and suspense of following along with Ayo Edebiri and her being a witness to Moretti being a real weirdo, all of that was enough to ensure that I leaned more in a positive direction than a negative one and scoring my feedback overall. Following along with the different moves she makes to try to get what she wants and get answers to these questions, I found it to be both entertaining and compelling. So I would recommend Opus to anyone that likes watching Ayo Edebiri, John Malkovich, and is open to art being a bit odd, a bit peculiar, but also, and this is a key point I'm going to make that I will explain a lot more when we go into the spoiler section, I would say that part of what's going to make or break your enjoyment of the film overall is whether or not you're open to being asked to think about the material.
Mr. Moretti, we'll be playing the greatest album of modern times.
Now let's talk about spoilers, but mostly just the ending. When Ayo gets her invitation to the listening party, it comes as a bit of a surprise because her boss, the one that keeps overlooking her, taking her ideas and assigning those ideas to other journalists, he had already received his gift basket. The other people that receive invitations are considerably more high profile and established in their fields than Ayo. You had Ayo's boss, a well-known paparazzi photographer, an influencer, a talk show host, people like that. And there's this lingering question that isn't answered until the end of the film of where Ayo fits into all of this. How and why would she have been selected with the rest of these people? So Ayo and all the others go to the compound, and very quickly it becomes apparent to both Ayo and the audience that something is wrong. Some of the people start to disappear from this party of newcomers. You presume that at least one of them has died, but you're still being pulled into this mystery of what's being done to the people who have disappeared. Why is this happening to them? And why is it these people specifically? And I didn't feel like the answer was as clear in the end as I would have liked. So Ayo is the only one who escapes. She summons the cops who come back to the compound, and at that point everyone else is gone. Moretti's followers have disappeared, but all the other people who were invited to the listening party are dead. And Moretti is the only one left alive. So then we get this time jump to when Moretti is now in prison for those murders and Ayo is on a book tour because she wrote a book about her experiences of going to Moretti's compound, surviving, escaping, and everything that happened in the middle where she was learning about this cult, the members of which are called levelists. So Moretti finally agrees to let Ayo visit him in prison and have a conversation with her so she can get some quotes from him. Now, as far as I can tell, at that point, the book's already been printed, but I don't know if those quotes would have just been used for her publicity tour or perhaps to put together in a second book. But finally, she asks Moretti the question, why me? So why was Ayo Edebiri invited to this compound? And as it turns out, Moretti and whomever on his team might have been helping him to investigate things, they had specifically chosen to invite Ayo so that she could be the witness to everything that was going to happen and get the word out about this cult and their ideology. Moretti's followers are revealed to still be alive. They've gone back out into the world, many of them doing seemingly inconsequential jobs, but they're waiting for something? Waiting to be called to action, or maybe they were using their teachings to try to steer people in the world of where it needs to go. Now, I had originally expected that at some point Moretti was going to give a villain monologue, or there would be some sort of reveal of why he wanted to get rid of those other people that he had invited to the listening party, either because of his own personal grievances with them, or perhaps their occupation, something ideological, but for the most part, it didn't feel like he was actually the one to say much about them and why they died. Ayo, when she visits Moretti in jail, she points out some of the things that she had found herself in doing research between when she escaped the compound and now when she's written her book and is visiting Moretti in jail. So her saying those things out loud while visiting him, it kind of felt like some sort of offhand exposition dumping. You asked us, the audience, to watch these people visit this compound and meet their demise, and all of this was an incredibly elaborate scheme to make new music, get them there. It required a lot of very careful planning and organization. But now, apparently that wasn't even the important part. Your big bad isn't even going to explain himself why those people fit into his grand vision, his manifesto. One thing that stood out to me while Ayo was there on the compound and meeting different members of the cult, as well as Moretti himself, is that she is the only one questioning things. She is the one that can see and feel that something's wrong, but every time she tries to bring that up to the other people who were invited, they respond like she's the one that's crazy or in the wrong for questioning things. All of them had to turn over their phones when they arrived. They also took away Ayo's laptop by going through her personal belongings that she had brought with her. All of the guests are also assigned a personal concierge, which basically amounts to having one of the cult members staying with them at all times. If you are in your bedroom and you look out the peephole, your personal concierge is sitting right there. In theory, that means you cannot go anywhere on the compound or do anything without them knowing. Ayo also correctly guesses at one point that they are all being spied on even in their rooms. The guests never outright discover this, but the audience is shown the fact that there are surveillance cameras in all of the rooms, and some of the cult members are sitting in a surveillance room where they can monitor exactly what's going on in there. Now, one of the things that they show throughout this time at the compound is that Ayo is more inquisitive. She wants to investigate, partially because she's a journalist, but she also approaches things with a respectful demeanor where she will ask people questions about what they do, what they believe, what certain practices mean, and so on and so forth. When you finally hit the point of the needle drop where things take a turn for the worse, things are brought to the surface, and the rest of the guests have to learn that Ayo Edebiri was right the whole time about being suspicious. There's a bit of back and forth that happens between Moretti and Ayo. He's explaining some things, but not really. He's referencing Caesar, and Ayo is the only one that understands what he's talking about, so she can somewhat engage in the discourse. Following up on that point, when she visits him in prison, he says something to her about human evolution of their species moving from surviving using brawn to analytical brain power, specifically the left brain. But Moretti believes that this religion or ideology that he's following, because he claims that this is some sort of belief system that already existed as opposed to something that he came up with himself. Now it's time for the human species to move to being ruled by the right brain instead of the left brain. He has seemingly cultivated the group of people that he brought into the compound to be his followers. One of the ones that Ayo spoke with was, I believe, a music teacher. So from what I could gather, because again, it started to get quite convoluted at the end, and I was torn between trying to just watch the film and pay attention, actively listen, versus also trying to scribble down a lot of notes for the sake of putting a review together. What I could gather is that Moretti believes that people who are more creative, artistic, holistic, those types of people are better suited to lead the world. He also mentioned something about how literacy rates have gone down, and I'm definitely presuming that he's referring to the US specifically, because that's where he is, that's where he's gathering followers from, and during an introductory montage to his character, they do things like show him as having played with Bill Clinton earlier on in his career. It's Moretti playing music while Bill Clinton is accompanying him on the saxophone. There are also other real-life celebrity cameos. Bill Burr has a cameo where he's talking about Moretti on his podcast. Wolf Blitzer speaks about Moretti on his show. So I have to presume that the story is talking about the real world that the audience lives in. So if the story is addressing the rise of anti-intellectualism, particularly in America, then what does Moretti represent? On the one hand, the way that his followers follow him and his beliefs, even when they cause injury to themselves, and the way that these people who are invited just go along with everything, that could be representative of how people will unquestioningly follow the whims of celebrities, as well as any type of cult of personality in any sector. Pop culture, traditional cults, or politicians. Now, John Malkovich is charismatic, and he's also funny, so that makes for a greater entertainment value. In particular, the part where he's showing his new music to the group, and the camera is following him around, that was a high point of the viewing experience. Very funny, visually dynamic, and all around entertaining. But ultimately, Moretti is not a savior. He's petty, vain, vengeful, and he's not nearly as clever as he thinks he is. He doesn't actually have any answers or solutions to the problems of the world. Maybe there's a glimmer or a spark of something that could be taken from his ramblings and applied in a way that's useful, but that's probably more of a situation of a broken clock is right twice a day. If I were to try to extrapolate meaning from Ayo's character journey, maybe there's something to be found there about digital digital footprints, an article that she seemed to consider largely inconsequential from much earlier on in her come-up, was the article that made Moretti think she was the right person to witness and document what was going to happen at the compound. Or maybe it's more so the fact that you can prove your worth even when you think you haven't made an impression. Or is it trying to tap into something to do with living in a surveillance state? Do you see what I mean, where it kind of felt convoluted by the end? Ayo feels very disillusioned, and maybe it's more so that she feels manipulated at the end of the story when Moretti explains how and why she was chosen to be there. So much so that the movie ends with her being asked a question on a television interview on her book tour, and she's just stunned by her experience of meeting Moretti again in prison and everything he had to say about how she was set up by him to be in this position she now is at. The parts that I liked about the ending is the concept of the film critiquing celebrity worship or critiquing any sort of unquestioningly following of a cult of personality. The hero of the story, the protagonist, is someone who questions things that don't seem right. Condemning anti-intellectualism, all of those parts of the story and how it finishes, I enjoyed that. But what I didn't like about the ending is that it felt like it was too jumbled in how it approached trying to address maybe one too many things for the ending to be able to stick its landing. What was the point of bringing all of those other people in for this visit to the compound just to be violently killed? What was the point of the oyster shucking? It just felt like there were one too many things going on. They set things up during the climactic action, chasing Ayo around the compound, where she finds cyanide at Moretti's house. So you think it's going to be a situation of mass poisoning, the way that other cults have done in real life, but that doesn't end up happening. Like I said, the cult members are all alive at the end. The ideology of the Levelists didn't feel clearly communicated in a way where I felt like I understood what they were doing. If I were to rewatch the film, probably at home when I could pause things, rewind, take notes, and make sure I was catching every single detail, maybe I could reach a more concrete conclusion about what the film is trying to say. But as is, with only being able to watch the film one time at an early press screening as is customary, it didn't feel clear enough to where I could rate it higher than I did. That being said, for the majority of the film, I was having a good time. I laughed quite a bit. The line about the foundation that John Malkovich said, that really made me laugh. I think there was a point directly before the movie has its big, dramatic, violent turn where Ayo wants to leave the compound, but they try to get her to come to the next scheduled activity because the bus isn't back yet. And when they asked her to come, I think I said out loud, no. And I was just shaking my head no. And a different member of the press that was sitting a few seats down from me laughed because they had heard what I said. Listen, it was a reflex. Like I already said, the second you got off the bus and saw everyone dressed in blue, that would have been when I was done. I'm not going in there. I know that I've more or less only talked about the ending for this part of the review, but I don't think people want to watch a review of this film that's even longer than I've made it, so I'm just going to stop things there.
Moretti requires that everyone be shaven. So, how's the lady garden?